Chapter 39. Before the Storm. Less than an hour after Quinnigoth and Tanegi had declared the area clear, the mass forces of the human army were deployed on the slope of the hill behind a large magical screen that hid them from the rest of the island. They were gathered in tidy ranks, each man in his own regiment. The archers stood behind the men-at-arms, the men-at-arms behind the peasants, and right at the front were the leaders of the army, with their knights and cavalry arrayed behind them. Scattered about the slope, in small groups and usually gathered in the branches of the few trees that grew on the slopes, were the harpies of Race's village. Every harpy of 8 years or older had been given permission to fight in this battle, whether she had completed her rite of passage or not, and they numbered barely 100. The others, those considered too young to fight or so old as to be considered incapable of fighting, had remained in the painting with the rest of the human villagers. In total, the army was just under 20,000 strong. Some of them, like the knights, wore both heavy armour and carried a wide array of weapons, ready for anything. Others, most notably the peasants, were unarmed, and most of them were armed with little more than farming implements. The blacksmiths of the encampment simply hadn't been able to keep up with all the orders. Ray stood at the very front of the army with the leaders. Gagara stood by his side, and his 3 bodyguards, Quinnigoth, Tanegi and Samigi, stood behind him, each of them armed with a dart thrower. Race would have preferred it if Samigi had stayed behind in the painting. She was very heavily pregnant, and though she wasn't due for several days, she might still give birth at any moment. He didn't feel right that she should risk her child in this coming battle. However, he had made a promise to her, and she meant to ensure that he kept it. To be frank, Race felt a little out of place at the front. The other leaders that were gathered there were all sitting on the backs of horses. Although Race had a horse, he didn't use it, preferring to stand on his own 2 feet where he could deploy his wings at a moment's notice, and where he wasn't towering over his wife. All the leaders were there. King Goti and Queen Jenny were in the middle of the group. Duke Greyforth the Moth was on the king's left side with both Sir Grant and Anida. Anida wasn't actually considered one of the leaders, but she had nowhere else to be. Duke Manipul Canespa, Duchess Tamatha Borton and Manglos were all gathered on the Queen's right side. Race and Gagara stood next to Manglos. Manglos had cast some kind of spell that Race didn't recognise. He was surveying the battleground, using what appeared to be nothing more than a patch of empty air, surrounded by a light blue glow. First he concentrated on what was happening around the pit, and then he changed the focus of his attention towards the volcano, evidently trying to discern all he could about his enemy before the battle started. "I wish you wouldn't insist on fighting with us," Queen Jenny commented. At first, Race thought she was addressing him. He might be the leader of the Harpies, but he was still her younger brother. "As the Duchess of Borton, I have a right to be here," Tamatha said stubbornly. "My people are fighting this battle too." "You should have stayed with Movieletta in the ring," Duke Manipul said. "You'd be safer there." "I'm here," Tamatha said. "I'll stay back when the fighting starts. I see no one is telling the Queen that she can't fight." "Actually, we did," King Goti said with a slight chuckle in his voice, but she refused to listen. King Goti then decided to change the subject. He looked about the army and then said to Manglos, "It looks like we're about as ready as we'll ever be. You can drop the screen any time." Manglos replied, only half listening. "Oh, yes, drop the screen." He put the nothing back to his eye and checked the battlefield over once again. "I don't like the look of that mountain." It was Greyforth's turn to speak. "It's far too close. Didn't you say there was something like 70 harpy villages up there? Is that right?" Yes, Manglos said, glancing briefly towards the Duke. 70 villages. "And 30 or more gathered over by the pit," Race volunteered. "What?" the king exclaimed in shocked surprise. He glanced slowly round at Race, having to lean back in order to see the harpy past the horses of the others. "Are you telling me that there are 100 villages of harpies arrayed against us?" "Well, I didn't stay at the pit long enough to get an accurate count," Race admitted. "There are more harpies than there are of us," Duke Manipul commented. "Manipul is right," the king said. He cupped his head in his hands. "That's far too many for us to handle." "We should leave," Manipul suggested. "Otherwise we're going to get slaughtered." The king looked accusingly at Manglos. "Why didn't you warn me?" "I didn't know," Manglos replied. "Whatever it is the elves have planned over there, they're keeping the whole thing hidden from any form of scrying magic. The harpies by the pit must also be within the influence of that magical field. I am unable to see what they are doing down there. I'm surprised they were actually visible to the naked eye." "They probably weren't expecting anyone to get this close," Tamatha offered. "Probably," Manglos agreed. The king glanced toward Manipul. "Maybe we should leave." "It would be wise," Duke Manipul advised. "Wait," Ray spoke up. "Nothing has changed. So the army you're facing is a little bigger than you expected. Bigger? Duke Maniple offered. It's twice the size. No one said this battle was going to be easy, Race reminded them. The stakes haven't changed. There are only a few months of food left in the painting. After that, our people will have to emerge to whatever world awaits them. If we flee now, that world will be under the elven thumb. If we fight now, there is a chance, however small, that the world will be free, even if that world is nothing more than this island. We could try and start again elsewhere, the king suggested. Get everyone back into the painting. Have you and your girls fly us for 2 months in any direction. Start again. Is that what you want us to do? Race asked. Gagara and I could cover a lot of ground in 2 months. That's coward's talk, Gagara said. I'd rather die here than live the rest of my life knowing that I ran from battle. Then you stay and fight, Maniple said sharply. The fewer harpies in the world, the better anyway. I love you too, Gagara replied sarcastically. King Goatee sighed. We need a plan of action. Duke Maniple sounded a little cross. You're not seriously considering listening to this creature? I am, the king replied. Gagara is right, we can't run. This is my homeland, and I will die rather than let the elves have it. And what do we do about the harpies? Maniple pressed. There must be at least one of them for each of us. In hand-to-hand combat, their superior strength will almost certainly get the better of us. We harpies don't fight like that, Gagara explained. Not unless we really have to. They'll attack, keeping out of range of your bows, and... Yes, thank you, dear, Greyfall snarled. We are well aware of harpy tactics. So, they attack, Gagara said, skipping ahead. They will probably get some of us, but then they will have to return to their villages to get a fresh supply of arrows and darts. That would give you the time you need to attack. When they see how few we are, Maniple commented, they might decide to change their tactics. Possibly, Gagara said, but doubtful. Then, after a second's pause, she added, or you might just neutralise them as a threat totally. Oh, the king said, and how would we do that? Gagara laughed. You wait until night falls before you attack. Attack at night, the king commented. How does that help? Harpies can't see in the dark, Jenny said, suddenly realising what Gagara was suggesting. Quite, Gagara agreed. If they can't see, they can't fly. And if they can't fly, they are no threat. They can't shoot at you from above, and they aren't likely to charge in on foot. It would be they who got massacred. The battle would come down to you against the elves. By the time the harpies could do anything about it, the battle would be over, Race offered. But, my leader, Quennegoff voiced worriedly, the night would affect us as well as the enemy. We wouldn't get to fight either. That's not important, Race said, his voice tempered with a touch of anger. No, Gagara replied. You see, Handsome knows a little bit of magic. He's used it on you before. It will enable us to see in the dark. If he gives us the ability, the humans will still have their air support, while the elves will be relatively helpless. I know that spell, Jenny offered. As does Mangloss. What spell? Mangloss asked. Cat sight, Jenny voiced. Yes, Mangloss agreed. I know it. What is more, I could cast a mass version of that spell. Harpies might be blind in the dark, but humans and elves aren't much better off. With a little magic, though, we'd have a great advantage over the enemy. You know, the king said with a smile, I'm beginning to think we might have a chance after all. He glanced towards Maniple. The Duke nodded his head. I'm willing to try, but don't the elves have mages of their own? Well, yes, Gagara replied calmly, but if you know anything about elf-harpy relationships, it's highly unlikely that the elves will think about giving their harpies such abilities. They might even think twice about giving it to their soldiers. And I doubt they have a mass version, Jenny suggested. Good, the king said. We wait until tonight then, and then we attack. Mangloss, can you keep us hidden until then? Will the screen stay in place until we're ready? Normally I would say yes, Mangloss commented, but, the king replied. Mangloss pointed towards the volcano. Something is going on over there. He placed the nothing back to his eye, examining the scene closer. Over by the mountain a cloud seemed to be rising slowly into the sky. To Race, at this distance, they appeared to be no more than specks of dust with tails leading down to the various harpy villages. Horse and tiger, Jenny exclaimed worriedly. They can't have seen us, Greyfall hovered. We're hidden. Then Tamatha spoke. I never imagined I would ever see a sight like that. The king glanced briefly at Greyfall and then turned his head to Mangloss. Your screen is still up, isn't it? I mean, they can't have seen us. Yes, Mangloss replied, taking the nothing away from his eye again. The screen is still in place. There's no way they can see us. They must have some other reason for taking off like that. They might have seen Gagara and myself land, Race said. But we did that an hour ago. I can't see why they would think it important to suddenly come over here now. To be fair, they're not actually heading this way, Gagara volunteered. No, but they must be gathering for some reason, Race told her. They look as if they're getting ready for battle. They must know we're here, Manipul said worriedly. Does that screen protect us as the one around the encampment did? No, Mangloss replied simply. It just hides us. I need time to cast a more powerful spell. Time we don't have, Manipur announced. Not if they've seen us. No, Mangloss agreed. We don't. Calm down, Gagara said, evidently trying to ease the tension. The 70 villages on that volcano aren't likely to trust each other further than they have to. Each of them is bound to leave a good number of huntresses to defend their home, just in case one of the others decides to try and take advantage of the situation. At most, they will only send a relatively small fraction of their number. I'm not sure that's comforting, Manipul commented. How many do you think they'll send? The king asked. If it was me, Gagara said, I'd feel no more than half my huntresses. Well, Jenny replied, assuming that each village has an average of 200 huntresses, that's still 7,000 harpies. 7,000 harpies? Manipur exclaimed, sounding terrified. That's, 35,000 arrows they can pour into us before they have to return and reload? Tamavil voiced. I may be wrong, but I think they are now coming this way. They must have seen us, Manipur voiced. So much for our night attack. But we're about to be massacred. We can still give them something to think about, the king said. He looked to Mangloss. They're still about a mile away, so we might have as much as 3 minutes. Mangloss, get to the back of the army and do what you can to extend the range of our bowmen. The least we can do is give our guests a surprise welcome. My liege, Mangloss said, bowing his head just slightly. Jenny, I believe you know the spell. I could use your help. On my way, Jenny replied. Daffodil, the king said worriedly, but he made no move to stop her. Instead, he turned his attention back to the steadily approaching cloud of harpies. Before he rode to the back of the army, Mangloss stopped for a moment next to Race and handed the nothing to him. Then he continued on his mission. Race looked at the nothing resting lightly in the palm of his hand. It seriously was nothing, just a circle of blue glowing light surrounding empty air. It had no weight and no substance. And yet when Race held it between the thumb and forefinger of one of his hands, the blue light obeyed as if it did actually have substance. There must be more than 7,000 up there, Manipur commented. No, Race said, forgetting the nothing for a moment. Harpies just look bigger in the sky. They make nice big targets if you can hit them, Gagara said. An arrow in the wing at that height could prove just as fatal as one in the heart. Greyfulf looked around at Gagara for a moment, and it looked as if he was going to make some kind of disparaging remark. Instead, he just nodded his head slightly. Okay, the king said. Battle stations, everyone. Greyfulf, I want you to take a third of the knights and go and sit on our left flank. Take Sir Grant with you. My liege, Greyfulf said. My liege, Sir Grant echoed. Be careful, father, Anita commented. Then she watched as Greyfulf and her father galloped away from the front line, taking approximately a third of the knights with them. The king turned his attention to Duke Manipul. I want you to take half of the remaining knights and sit on our right flank. The harpies are coming from the left, Manipul advised. I know, the king replied. We'll have more than harpies to face today, and I'm not planning on sending my knights against harpies in the first place. That's what the archers are for. My liege, Manipur agreed with a slight bow, and then he too turned from the front line. The king seemed to be virtually alone suddenly. Tamatha and Anida were still close by, and Anida did close the gap a little between her and the king. Of course, there were also still a good 100 knights lined up behind him. Now the king turned his attention fully on Race. I agree, we can't flee from this battle. Even if we had the time to get everyone back into the painting before the harpies reach us, we can't run. But, Race suggested, the idea of finding a new land for our people to make a new start in is a good one. I want it to be an option, a kind of backup plan. I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask a big favour of you. Race shook his head. I can't, my liege. I plan to fight with the rest of my people. I will be by your side at the end. Don't ask me to desert my sister or my brother, or even you, in order to save myself. Race, the king said, you are a knight of the realm, and therefore bound by my orders. You have the painting safely secured in your ring, I assume. I do, Race replied. He pulled the ring off of his finger, causing his body to revert to its male form. Then he approached the king and offered him the ring. I would rather you had it than I desert you. The king refused the ring. I'm not asking you to miss the battle, but if everything goes wrong here today, as it well might do, Then we need a backup plan. As a harpy, you can move through enemy territory easily. It was how you got us here safely in the first place. Don't let me down. If things go wrong, get as far away from here as you can and give our people, yours and mine, a fresh chance at life. Race hesitated and nodded. If I survive. Thank you, the king said. That's all I ask. Race sighed. He glanced up at the cloud of harpies. They were like a huge, untidy cloud of death. His huntresses would be swallowed by them in an instant. Race felt himself go a little weak at the knees at the sight of them. The cloud was approaching slowly. Had they been moving fast, they would already be overhead. Our bowmen are ready, Mangloss shouted from somewhere near the back of the army, his voice amplified through the use of magic. We've doubled their effective range. That should give the harpies something to think about, the king said keenly to those who were still near him. I guess this is it. Who would have thought that harpies would agree to charge him first, Gagara absently commented. Race shrugged his shoulders. He put the nothing next to his eye. He didn't know what it would do, only that this was how Mangloss had used it.